lens of their history, something that we don't really get a chance to talk about all that often. So today I have two wonderful visual tools for you. We used to have flannel graph. We have now updated. Now you have a handout and a slide. So I just called this a reference sheet. And you can use it to refer back to the Seleucid kings that we've discussed already so that you can keep them straight in your head. And, I went ahead and listed all the others that we will talk about in the diagram, the box and line chart of how all of these kings fit together. So there's some spoilers in there. Sorry, not sorry. I'm not want to, but the text will continue to fill out as we continue to discuss what these are. And so I went through what we should get through today, and then next time we'll add to it. Okay. So I mentioned last time that Jonathan is more of a politician, and Judas is more of a general. And politics take a lot more time to discuss than battles do. So we do have a lot to get through as we talk about Jonathan today. So very quickly, here's the history of the Hasmonean family that we've discussed so far. Mattathias was the priest. He started the revolt. He had 5 sons, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. Eleazar died in battle by being crushed by an elephant. And then we ended last week with Judas also dying in the battle. So now the family tree looks more like this. So picking up where we left off, the death of Judas kind of puts this revolt in a precarious situation, right? So once you get defeated, Judas only has one army, right? It's not like he's dividing and conquering like Antiochus IV did whenever he went to Persia and then also went to Israel. So, once his army gets defeated by Bacchides last week, that's it, right? So, what happens is, the victors go for the throat, right? So once their ranks break and they start retreating, it's go find everybody and go hunt out all of the revolutionists. So now they have their high priest in power, right? We talked about Alchemist being the guy that kind of had a legitimate claim to being the high priest, but really he is instated, and with the Hasmonean revolt kind of suppressed for the moment, they really kind of take full tilt of the situation. So there is just to sum it up, there was a great tribulation in Israel, the like of which had not been seen since the time prophets ceased to appear among them. So the writer of the Maccabees really kind of sees this as a desperate time. And this is not the first time that we've had this revolt hanging by a thread, right? There was the time that when they first started, right? When the Jewish culture in its entirety was hanging by a thread, and Mattathias decided that he wanted to start that revolt. That could have easily been squashed right then and there at the very moment of its inception, but it wasn't. Or when Lysias wins his second battle. I know that this was kind of going back, but again, you've got your reference sheet so you can remember who Lysias is. And the Judas won the first battle. Lysias won the second battle. He had besieged Jerusalem, and again, there were overwhelming odds, and the revolt is kind of saved at the last moment whenever Philip returns, claiming that he was the rightful heir because Antiochus IV had left him in charge, not Lysias in charge. And so Lysias had to go back and take care of that, and Jerusalem was able to kind of get out of that jam. And so the reason I bring these up is because the author of the Maccabees attributes a lot of things to the heroes of the Hasmonean family, but always working in the background is God. God is always there, kind of guiding how these things happen. And thank you. And so it's kind of a bit like what we see in the book of Esther, right? God is not directly attributed to a lot of the things that happen in Esther. It's more Mordecai and the characters in the stories that we see. But it's God who is really the one who is in charge. So in the same way, through this intertestamental period, God is the one who is in charge. Now, with Judas's death, everyone recognizes that they need a leader, that they can't just keep on going, trying to put their forces back together without somebody in charge to organize everybody. And so they choose Jonathan. So he's the one that's on the far right there. And the very next story, the very first thing that Jonathan gets to do as the guy who is officially in charge is deal with the death of John. So while they're being pursued, they're all kind of fleeing to the wilderness. And Jonathan and Simon decide to send John as a leader to a group called the Nabateans to ask for their support, to be allies for them, to help them stage some of their equipment. And along the way, a tribe of Jambri raids their envoy, and they carry off John and all that he has. And the text never explicitly says that John died, but Jonathan learns that Jambri, that the people of Jambri are having a wedding ceremony. And so they remember the blood of their brother, and they set an ambush. So as the wedding party is passing by, the family is marching the groom from wherever he's from to wherever the wedding is going to take place, and they've got their musicians and a festive attitude, and Jonathan comes out of the hills on either side of the road and ambushes them, and, of course, they flee, and their wedding is turned to mourning. And in so doing, they get revenge for their brother, and but now the family looks like this. So we're kind of coming to thinning out the Hasmonean family here, and there's 16 chapters in the book of First Maccabees, so you'll see that we've still got a couple more guys to go through, but they've got some grief to deal with themselves. Now, who remembers who was in power and killed Judas, right? You can go back to your slide. I actually put it up here. It was Demetrius the First, right? So I put in here who their top general was. I mentioned Bacchides being the top general is the one who killed Judas, but Demetrius the First is the one who is in power. So this is just kind of get your mind back into it. So Bacchides is the general governor, and he and Jonathan have another battle, right? So this will be the second time that they've met. Bacchides has proven himself to be a very worthy governor and general in the area. He's defeated the Hasmoneans twice. And so Jonathan he pulls all of his forces together for a last-ditch effort, and it's kind of just going to be inevitable that it happens. And Jonathan is kind of backed up against the Jordan River, and it's another hopeless situation. And the text kind of paints this in about as positive a light as it possibly can. It says that, Bacchides is almost killed, but Jonathan wasn't able to kill him. He jumps into the Jordan River and swims, and Bacchides is too unnerved to pursue him. And 1,000 of Bacchides' men have been killed, which sounds great, except realistically this was probably pretty much a defeat for Jonathan, right? He fled. He got in the river and swam away, and now he is in the wilderness, kind of basically forced to go back into hiding. And so since Jonathan, and really the primary issue and revolt that's been happening in this area for, the last 3 or 4 kings has been kind of suppressed for the moment, That means Bacchides is now going to consolidate his power. So over the next several years, he's going to do the things that you would expect the ruling authority to do. He's going to build fortifications in the cities throughout Judea. He's going to reinforce that citadel. Remember that citadel that's still there? It's still there. And so he keeps putting troops, and he takes the leaders' sons as hostage, right? This is the common thing that you do if you want to make sure that the leaders do the things that you want them to do. You hold their family as hostage. And in fact, Demetrius the First was a hostage in Rome at one point. So he's very familiar with this tactic. They also, they because of that power, and because they now have Alchemist the high priest instated, they've basically been able to just keep Jonathan at bay. And while they probably haven't exactly earned the popularity of the local people, of the Jews, they've probably at least got their attention and their respect, right, so that they don't step too far out of line. At some point, Alchemist gets sick. The text attributes this to being on board with Bacchides, basically, and for again, starting to tear down the walls of the temple. In this case, it's not just the outer walls that he's starting to tear down. He's starting to tear down the inner walls as well, and that's a big no-no, right? And so the text talks about how he is he's paralyzed, how he can't speak, how he can't give an order, and so we kind of assume that he had some sort of a stroke, and then he dies in great agony. So Bacchides, he's really kind of over all of this, and he just lost his right-hand man in keeping the people in check, and he says, you know what, I'm just going back to Demetrius. So he goes back to his king, and the text says that they're at rest for a couple of years, right? So they kind of go back to this this verbiage that you would see in the Judges, that, you know, whenever a judge comes and instills order, then the land is at rest. Eventually, Jonathan and Bacchides are going to sign a treaty, right? The other Jews, there's still some infighting of the Jews. Some of them are happy to have Jonathan to be the crusader for the Jewish culture and for God's cause, and others are just like, we have had enough of the bloodshed, we've had enough of the fighting, we've had enough of the being scared all of the time. And so those people, they are referred to as the renegades or the lawless Jews throughout the book of Maccabees. They convince Bacchides to come back. And Bacchides says, okay, sounds good, I'll come back, having been convinced by them that this is going to be an easy victory. And it doesn't. It does not go well for him. The battle doesn't go well for him, and he gets mad at the people who advised him. He kills a bunch of them, and he says, I've just had enough of you people overall. Like, I'm done. If you guys want to fight amongst yourselves, go for it. And he resolves to go home. So Jonathan, again, not so much the tactician, but very much the politician, understands that this is a perfect opportunity for him to kind of insert himself with Bacchides. And so he sends some ambassadors, and he says, look, we'll give you the prisoners that we had caught. We can have some sort of a prisoner exchange, and how about, you just not come back? That's the deal. We'll give you all of the prisoners, because these are soldiers that are the Seleucid soldiers. They're if they're well respected, and raising troops is not an easy thing to do, and so to get those prisoners back would be very advantageous for him. So he agrees to it, and in fact Bacchides swears, I'm never coming back, and he doesn't. And so Jonathan began to judge the people, and he eliminated the renegades from Israel. That's a direct quote. And he settles in a place called Michmash, and that becomes like his base of operations. So even though the text is really referring to Jonathan as this is all kind of a peaceful situation, and it very well may be, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions here. Why didn't he settle in Jerusalem, right? What happened to the Seleucid strongholds? I mean, they all appear to still be there. And so even though Bacchides himself isn't there, the Seleucids are still extending their power into the land of Judah. And it's really unclear who became the high priest since Alchemist died, right? Is this another person that is pro-Seleucid? Is this a person who is pro-Jonathan? Did they just not have somebody? Like they just had a by committee? Like we don't really know. None of those questions get answered. But it's okay, right? We know that Jonathan is now kind of in a place of goodwill for the people. He's judging the people, which is a good sign that people respect him. And just when we think that things are settling down, of course they cannot stay that way, right? So we have this guy, Alexander Ballas, appears in the year 152. So he's on your chart. He's the one that's on the far left. He claims to be the rightful heir of the Seleucid throne. He says that he is the son of Antiochus IV, the long-lost son of Antiochus IV, and he's going to take on Demetrius, basically. Says, I don't think you're the guy. And he has a good backing from the locals, who don't like Demetrius, and he has a good backing from the Romans. And the Romans are on board with him because they're still a little salty that Demetrius I never had permission to take the throne in the first place. You may recall that he kind of escaped from Rome, landed in the area, said, this is mine now, and assassinated Antiochus V and Lysias. So he just kind of usurped the throne. Rome was okay with it. It wasn't so much a big deal that they were going to come in and do something about it, but they didn't really like or trust Demetrius from the get-go. So obviously Demetrius can't have an upstart, right? Like he's got to squash that. And but he sees how powerful Alexander is becoming. He's got the backing of a lot of powerful allies, and so Demetrius begins to start looking for allies himself. And so he writes to Jonathan, and he says, I want you to back me instead of Alexander in this whole big mess that's fixing to come. And both sides really kind of recognize that Judah is going to play a critical role in this. Not only because Jonathan does still command a substantial force, right? The nation of Judah is not something to sneeze at, but also because it's in a very strategic location. So it's between Egypt and Syria, right? So a lot of the battles that are going to take place are going to be right on the Jewish grounds. And so what you don't want are complications of locals that don't like you, that are backing the other person, that's going to be planning insurgencies and kind of terrorist acts whenever you're trying to defeat the other enemy that's in front of you. It's just a headache that you do not want. And so you want to get them on your side. And so Demetrius says, hey, look, I know we've had our druthers. Let's let bygones be bygones. I'll be nice now. I'll release those prisoners, right? Those hostages that Bacchides took. You can keep those guys. And Jonathan says, okay, that sounds like I understand why you would want to do that. And I'm going to go to Jerusalem now. And he runs out the Seleucids because whenever the local magistrates see that there's something coming, a letter from the king that says Jonathan's in charge, they say, well, I'm getting out of here, right? And so now that Jonathan is back in Jerusalem, he starts rebuilding the temple, and the other people that have been holding down those strongholds see that Jonathan's in Jerusalem and getting stronger, and they start to flee as well. Well, Alexander Ballas sees this, and he says, well, I can't have that. I don't want this guy to be on the other side either. And so he counteroffers. He sends Jonathan a letter, and he says, I tell you what, I know that Demetrius let your prisoners go, but here's the deal I'm going to give you. I'm going to make you a noble immediately. You're a member of my court, give you the title Friend of the King, and I'm going to appoint you as the high priest. So now you have the official authority within your own country and from me to do everything that you want to do with your people. And he sends, like, as part of the nobility, sends him a purple robe and a gold crown and, as basically saying, I'm serious about this. And Jonathan says, hey, I accept. That sounds, I would like to be the high priest and consolidate the Jews under me as a single point of authority. That sounds like a good plan to me. Well, we know that Mattathias was a Levite, so we assume he is too, right? Because Mattathias was a priest. So. Old Testament. Right. Yeah, the priests had to be Levites. Yeah. Yep. And so, pretty sure that's correct. So I'll go back and double check that. So what's really happening is that the text doesn't say this, but what's happening is Jonathan is playing behind the scenes. He's playing one off of the other. And it might say that the kings are initiating this and coming to Jonathan and saying, oh, you're the guy, we're so impressed by you. But really it's probably Jonathan kind of giving them hints. Hey, if you want me to be on your side, here's maybe something that you could do for me. And then they make that offer. And so Demetrius gives another counteroffer. He says, look, this is my final offer, and I'm going to make it so good that it's something that you cannot turn down. And I mean, he pours it on. He says, I will no longer collect taxes on grain or fruit. The tax on grain was 30%. The tax on fruit was 50%. I won't collect taxes on the temple. I will give you back that citadel that's in Jerusalem. All right? I will free all of the prisoners, not just the leaders that we have hostages, and I will cancel their debts. And then I'm going to hire 30,000 people to be my soldiers, which is a big deal because that, gives them a steady income. It gives them a position of some authority, right? To be an official Seleucid soldier is kind of a class thing. It's one up on just a normal person. And then also among those 30,000, some of those will be in, positions of authority that'll be, influential in my court. And then I'm going to give you Samaria. You guys can annex all of the region of Samaria, and I'm going to cover the cost of rebuilding the temple, all of the walls, all that on me. And Jonathan says, that is too good to be true. In fact, I don't believe you. It is, right? So he remembers how bad Demetrius had been, and for him to have this kind of 180 was just a little bit too much for him to swallow. So he sides with Alexander Ballas, who had been peaceable towards him so far, and he has no reason not to side with Alexander. And the text says that they remained allies for the rest of his life. And so whenever the inevitable battle ensues, right, there's going to be a huge battle between Demetrius and Alexander Ballas. And it does come. It's a huge affair. It lasts days, and Alexander wins. He kills Demetrius, and he becomes the king. So Alexander further consolidates his power, and he has a marriage of what we might call a political marriage, right? So this is, I'm sure you all are familiar with this, and it's kind of common that, if I'm a king and I marry the daughter of another ruler, it's a lot less likely that maybe you'll attack me because that means you're attacking your daughter too, right? So maybe we can kind of form a stronger alliance through some of these marriages. And you see this in Europe all the time. And so he marries the daughter of Ptolemy. And we've kind of hinted at Ptolemies before. So there's the Seleucids who are in Syria and the Ptolemies who are in Egypt. So he is now the Syrian king, and he's going to further an alliance with Egypt by marrying the Egyptian king's daughter, right? So, not the Pharaoh, the Greek who's in charge of Egypt at the time. All right, so this is a really big deal. And it's keeping true to his word. Jonathan gets invited to come to the wedding, and so he does. And he does such a good job of like wowing the people that he gets dressed in purple as soon as he arrives. He sits next to the king. He gets a promotion, so he's no longer considered a friend of the king. He is now a chief friend. So he is officially becomes the governor of Judea and all of its areas, to include like Samaria. And so whenever some of those renegade Jews, some lawless Jews come up and they try to complain to Alexander about Jonathan, Alexander's just not having any of it. He just summarily dismisses them and says, "Don't come to me with that garbage. I don't even want to hear it anymore." And so he actually has a proclamation announced. Don't try to come at me with just bad gossip against Jonathan. It's not helpful, and you're going to regret it if you try to do that. And this also kind of gives Jonathan an opportunity to deal with Ptolemy, right, and start building a relationship with Egypt, which is something that we hadn't seen any of that before. And so I know that I ran through that really fast, but I wanted to make sure that we got through it. We have a few minutes. Were there any questions? Okay, so just kind of a recap. Jonathan, we see really more of Jonathan as being the politician. We don't see Jonathan in a whole lot of battles. He does a couple, but he's not the general that we see as Judas is painted as in the beginning of the book and in 2nd Maccabees as well. Instead, we have him more playing one king off of another to the benefit of Judah. And we find that, he chose the right side in the big battle, right? He chose with Alexander. So if he had chosen with Demetrius and Alexander won, that would have been a very bad day. Would have been very bad news for all of Judea, right? And he's savvy enough to kind of navigate the courts of foreign kings and get himself promoted and through the ranks and really kind of just gaining influence for Israel. The higher up you go and the more you can bend the king's ear to influence him, the better it's going to be for your region back and your country and your kinsmen, the Jews. And so next time, we are going to talk about the rise of Demetrius II. And in fact, that's the very next story in the Maccabees. So we will leave it at that, and thank you so much for your attention.